Waiting for 7. Oh, there you go. Who's got the alarm on? All right, it is 7 p.m. and I will call the meeting to order. If we could stand for the pledge and please remain standing for a moment of silence in remembrance of a Milford Public School staff member who passed away last week and those who lost their lives today in the Tennessee school shooting. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. This is the Committee of the Whole meeting of the Milford Board of Education. It is March 27th, 2023. So before we get started, as you all know, the Board of Finance voted on March 15th to reduce our proposed budget increase by $1.8 million. This is a significant reduction considering the bulk of the increase is attributable to contractual obligations, salaries, tuition, transportation, things like that. I want to be clear that the budget process still has a ways to go before the Board of Aldermen takes their final action. That will conclude in May. But with the severity of this decision by the Board of Finance, it's prudent for us as a board to start some preliminary conversation at our level on the potential impact to the district should this reduction stand. So again, tonight we'll just begin the conversation about some of the difficult decisions we might have to make as we continue along the process. We will not be taking any action at this time as we are still 6 or so weeks away from the final budget adoption by the aldermen. Their process will begin soon with a public hearing that will be a public comment session for residents at City Hall on a date to be determined. And then our presentation to the aldermen will occur sometime later in April. So with that, I'll turn the meeting over to Dr. Kutaya.
Thank you, Ms. Glennon. Thank you, board members. This evening's discussion will take part in 2 different parts. The first part is based on the slides that are being handed out this time. Ms. Griffin has enough handouts for the public as well. And the second part will include sort of a line-by-line potential reductions.
I'm sorry, Mr. Roll Call. We need to do that.
Okay, do that.
Ms. Griffin, can you do a roll call for us, please?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Catherine Ailing. Here. Adam DeYoung.
Here.
Megan Doyle.
Here.
Andrew Fowler.
Here.
Tracy Irby.
Here.
Emily McDonough Souza.
Here.
Gary Pellicetti.
Here.
Una Petrowski.
Here.
Cindy Wolf Boynton.
Here.
And Susan Glennon.
Here.
All board members present.
Thank you. And please note that Ms. Petrowski is remote. I'm sorry, Dr. Kutaya.
Thank you, Ms. Glennon. Thank you, board members. So many of you have proven my strategy this evening. I handed out the slides and you already started looking through it. And hence my strategy to hand out the numbers next. So I am intentionally establishing a backdrop for our discussion this evening. So we're not jumping right into what are the reductions. Because I feel like it's my responsibility to narrate what these reductions could possibly mean for our school system. This is not just a formula for the superintendent of schools of Milford. This is not just a number, a reduction on a proposed budget. This is, for me, an impact on the progress that we potentially could be making in our school system. Therefore, I feel like I need to start with a backdrop before we get into numbers. So I'm gonna jump right in with something that should be familiar to everyone. I want to ground this discussion starting this evening once again on what are the most important things for our school system. Relationships is the foundation for everything we do. Particularly, what we do is based on the developmental relationships framework. High quality instruction is a homegrown definition of what we want to happen in every single classroom in Milford schools. And to be specific, there are 491 of them. And lastly, we have a vision of the learner. Now that may just have become quite a title that is overused in education, but in Milford, it is alive and well. We have a vision for every single kiddo. My budget proposed to you that was adopted by this board, I assure you, is always grounded in these 3 tenets. It's what drives what we do every day and drives the budget. Let me provide to you, though, a scope of the work, because we could very easily get lost in a $102 million, $104 million, $106 million conversation. But let me provide for you scope. As of today, we have 5,400 students. We have about 1,300 employees that work across 15 campuses. We have 14 school buildings and a central office here at Parsons. As I mentioned, we have 491 classrooms that this budget supports. We transport almost 4,000 kids every day along the roads of this great city. We serve 656,000 meals to our children. We have about 1.1 million square feet of building space that we're responsible for. And we take care of about 179 acres of land. That's the scope that this budget supports. So I'm just going to lay out the what we proposed and you adopted back in January. This layout is important to remember as we go throughout the presentation. This represents the breakdown of the requested 4.392%. If you'll note, the very first category, salaries and benefits, is 3.43% of the 4.392. That represents $3.5 million. Coming out of the gate with no new initiatives, minus the 4 counselors and the equity supervisor in there, this is continuing business as usual. That would require us to have an increase of $3.5 million. You'll note the breakdown of the others. Special needs tuition, transportation, those are primarily fixed. We serve the students that are here among us who have special needs, and sometimes that changes. In fact, every year it changes. And transportation costs, that's a guarantee of increase year after year. We can count on that going up. Some system improvements that amount to $177,000, and then some state mandates, which quite honestly, we underestimated on those intentionally. So that is the breakdown of the 4.392. Let me lay out for you what the 2.58 increase would amount to. Now, it is correct. What the Board of Finance approved is 2.58% of what our current budget is, while it is below what we requested. But numerically speaking, 258 equals $2.6 million. I'm going to draw your eyes to the chart above again. That doesn't even cover our salary increases. Intentional pause. 2.6 million doesn't cover the salary increases. That's going to require us to go into other categories to reduce. It is not going to be simply, let's cut the FTEs that we have, which we're going to address here in a minute. So please know, keep these numbers in mind, that the salary and benefit line is a $3.5 million increase. 2.6 is what we'll receive in total across the whole budget. So a slide from the presentation, just to remind everyone visually, that 71% of our budget is salaries. You'll see the other categories represent very small percentages of the overall budget. Another visual here represents the same exact thing, so whether you're a graph or chart person, please note that many of these object codes are pretty much costs that are rising that are out of our control. Let me draw your attention to transportation. Transportation is increasing by $311,000. We can't go back to Durham and say, sorry, that's too expensive. And we also have additional students with special needs that need to be transported out of district. You'll also note that some of the other categories that are more flexible, such as other support, educational supplies, we did take reductions in. We found efficiencies trying to move forward. So this next part of this presentation includes addressing some statements that have been made so that I have an opportunity to float out some facts based on our research and understanding of the statistics. So let's address the school system is becoming very top-heavy. There's more administration, quote unquote. For the past 10 years, actually, the number of administrators has remained flat. We've added a position for supervisor equity engagement. This board supports that. The work is critical. So you'll see that over the last 10 years, actually, we haven't gotten top-heavy. Right before the 13-14 school year, actually, Milford Public Schools had a model that, in my opinion, is grossly inefficient. They did not have administrators overseeing content areas. Rather, they had curriculum coordinators who were part-time teachers and part-time coordinators. Now imagine trying to teach a part-time load and then focusing on district-wide curriculum. So let's apply that to the elementary school. Let's say you are a part-time coordinator for literacy at the elementary level. I'm not sure how you teach an elementary kid half-time or a class half-time, but now you're supposed to write and develop and support curriculum implementation in today's elementary schools across 224 classrooms. Not a job for part-time work. So the superintendent at the time, because it was basically the same financially, moved to a system that moved away from coordinators and moved toward content specialists, people who have been deeply steeped and trained, as you have seen before you board members, right? During every instructional highlight. We have some of the best leading our curriculum. Sometimes I feel like curriculum is a little misunderstood. You don't really see it, right? You don't see it in the homework that comes home or the presentations your kids make. Curriculum for me is like an oil change on my car. I'm not very good at that, by the way. I need those reminders that I get in the email or text from my dealership saying, I think you need to come in for an oil change. If I ignore those signals, my car will likely continue to run, right? To a certain point. And then there are going to be other things going wrong. If curriculum is not tended to, other things will start to go wrong eventually. Let's take on another perception. 2.58% is the largest increase in the last 5 years. Actually, when you compare what has been requested and approved, that might be true and not true, depending how you look at it. So 2.58 has not been what the Board of Ed has proposed, but 2.583 has been the greatest amount in the last few years approved by the Board of Aldermen. Let's take a look at another statement. The Board of Education is now recommending a budget that increases spending by 100% more than any other increase previously. You'll notice that over the, almost 20 years here, there have been other significant increases. Now I want everyone to remember this slide because we're going to make a correlation between the decrease of percentage increases starting around the 12-13 year. We're going to make a correlation to the number of teachers at the time. Another statement made is that there's more counselors and teachers in the school district. You can clearly see that is not true. In fact, there are more counselors recently, and I've been quite vocal about that. And this board supported the notion that we need counselors in our schools. And I don't think we need to defend any longer why. Our kids are not always okay. They're great. We have some of the best kids. But our kids aren't always okay. As evidenced through the hardest of examples, our adults are not always okay. and our families are not always okay. Those counselors provide much more than crisis support. In fact, that's our best investment in prevention. Getting to kids and tooling them with how to deal with life. I still stand firmly that we need counselors in our elementary schools and increased support at our middle. Now, I did ask you to pay attention to the 12-13 years. You see, this school system has responded to declining enrollment. Look at the FTEs. They've gone down. In fact, I would propose one strategy that a leader can use is that when enrollment is decreasing and you can naturally decrease FTEs, you can take those efficiencies and one, save money, which we've done. If you go back to the increases, they've been lowered. And two, you can take that savings and trade it in for program improvement, which has been happening over the last few years. So both FTEs have decreased, the budget increases have been lowered, and progress has occurred. So Dr. Cutaia, why is it different now? I propose a couple of things are happening. One, I propose that our enrollment is actually flattening out. We've talked about that over the last year. It's plateauing. So what happens when enrollment starts to plateau? You have fewer savings in FTEs. You have fewer reductions in FTEs. Your budget doesn't decrease as much. You have a stabilized system of a workforce. And now at the same time, we want to continue progress. And therefore, there isn't enough savings in the budget by a decline in enrollment and decline in FTE, but we still want to make progress. So that is an impact on budget in this climate. We have rising costs like everybody else. School systems are not immune to what we're experiencing at the gas stations or in the grocery store. That's hitting us as well. So let's just talk a little bit about the organization of a school system. We are a human capital driven organization. We do our business because of people. We deliver service through people. So this notion that enrollment goes down, FTE must go down, is somewhat proven out, with the exception of the last couple of years, if you notice. Because we have been adding programming for kids. Add programming, oftentimes, not always, means add staffing. An example of adding programming without staffing is utilization technology. You don't always need an FTE with that. But let's talk about two clear examples of improved programming that automatically increased our FTEs by 16. And that's the Elementary World Language Program and the Elementary STEM Program. Elementary World Language, yes, great idea. Let's be one of the few school districts in the state of Connecticut to offer world language at the elementary school. That'll really put us on the map. That's 8 FTEs. You can't ask an elementary school teacher who's trained, who specializes in literacy and mathematics and the whole child to now teach 20 minutes of Spanish. Oh, let me add that to your load. Don't worry if you don't speak Spanish. If we believe in program improvement, like world language, it's going to mean increasing FTEs. So let's take a look at the middle school for a moment. We have intentionally changed the schedule. That's a tee-up to adding electives and starting career paths early in our system. We want 7th graders to start talking about what I might want to be when I grow up by taking electives at the middle school. We may need to diversify those electives. It may mean trading in some FTEs, but it also may mean increasing FTEs. I said no to a request this year for next year in the budget to add a Mandarin teacher for the middle schools. If we introduce Mandarin as an elective, you bet we're gonna have to add an FTE there, or 2 or 3, depending on its popularity. Yes, we potentially could be reducing FTE in the other world language, but maybe not. We have, you have approved the additional FTE at the high school for the expanding CNA program. If we don't do that, which is on the list tonight, that means we're saying no to kids. And that's okay. Like, we say no to kids in some other areas where some courses might be overfilled. But here, the importance is we're actually trying to expand this career path. This career path is becoming stronger in our high schools. And guess what? The world is telling us we're short on nurses. And we actually have plans to expand our advanced placement, our ECE courses. And right there in the chart are all the AP courses that we offer. But you know what's happening in the world of music in Milford Public Schools, right? It's on fire. Why aren't we offering music theory AP? We need to. Kids are coming. They're going to want to be challenged. So AP music theory may require an FTE, or maybe 0.5 or 0.2. You see, this slide is just me overemphasizing that decreasing enrollment does not always equal decreasing FTEs. Maybe I've made my point. Okay, 2 more slides and then we'll get into what you're all here for, I'm sure. We just have these numbers for you to keep on everybody's radar. This is public information. We have 7 bargaining units? 9? 7? 8. 8.
Yeah.
We think 8, 7 to 9, sorry. We have 8 bargaining units. Those contracts are negotiated through a legal process, and we already have the numbers through 2026. So please see the range there on the screen. On average, it's a 2.71, 2.7, 2.75. Let's just say there is an unspoken rule that the Board of Ed budget can't increase more than 2.58. Because that's certainly kind of what I heard. If that is an unspoken rule, that it's 2.58, just take a look at this slide. We're always going to get cut. We can't even afford the contractual wage increases at 2.58. We won't be able to afford increases in transportation. We won't be able to afford increases in utilities. And oh yeah, how about improving programming? So that is something that we need to ponder as we move forward, knowing that we have these numbers in front of us. Those are facts. We don't have to guess as to what the number is going to come in for the next 3 years. So I just want to underscore that what we're going to talk about next is these are not my recommendations. If you want to see what I recommend, pull up the film from January. That's what I recommend. That's what I believe is our next step moving forward in Milford. Our needs are expressed, our needs, I want to emphasize, our needs are expressed in that proposed budget. I believe that considering some things that will be in front of you today will most assuredly slow us down in progress, and in some cases, as you will see, represents a step backwards. And I think it should cause us, this process, in a very healthy way, and not adversarial, but in a really healthy community dialogue. How will we support educational progress moving forward? Because we're facing rising costs. You see the contractual obligations. So we just have to have a very professional, healthy dialogue on how do we do this for our kids and for our teachers and for our staff members. So at this time, we're going to move into the second part of the dialogue. I'm going to sit down so we can talk about this part. We're going to go over each line in the spreadsheet as soon as you get it. And I am going to say again, these are not my recommendations, but this is a scope of options I believe at this point in the process, we need to consider all things, okay? So we have it on the screen for the people who are watching at home. We don't expect to be able to see that. That's why you should have some spreadsheets in front of you, okay? And if you don't have a copy this evening, or if you are wanting to share a copy of this, I don't know where Ms. Minetti is, but I think she is in the process of uploading this to our website. Okay? Okay, Ms. Glennon? Okay. So let's start with the possibility of closing an elementary school, possibility of closing a middle school, and the possibility of closing the academy. Those are all real possibilities. They end up on the scope of options for potential reduction. After we did the math, it's not a complete it's not a complete exercise in subtraction, because as you close a school, those children have to be redistributed, and it's not just automatically absorbed by the system. There will be, in all cases, the need to reassign staff, in all cases to reassign and reroute bus transportation. So I'm going to go through each one of these and talk about the savings and how it could potentially impact the system. So if we close an elementary school, we believe it's about a 32.1 FTE. Savings would be a 1.2 million for the first year only. So it would definitely require us to redistrict all schools. So you're not just going to close one school and then redistrict those or right around it. It's a domino. It'll be like a wave that occurs. It could increase class size depending on where the kids fall, and it could also potentially lower some. It could impact employees in all 8 elementary schools. There will likely be some layoffs, reassigning many staff members, space utilization issues. My wondering what space is with all the specialized programming that we've been able to develop in-house, which, by the way, is an efficiency because we don't send students out for a specialized program, we keep them here. So the good thing is we've created specialized programs. The challenge would be where we put all of them. And we've had some real conversations about some real classes and where would they best fit. Certainly we don't want to go back to any days on having art and music on a cart, OT-PT in the hallway. Like, we really have to look at our spaces. And I did present to this board and other boards in the city a couple years ago the reality of our space, and even provided some pictures of some spaces, provided a walkthrough of some of our schools to show you how we're using space today that is different than in the 60s and 70s. There's potential increase in facility costs to accommodate increased staffing and students at other schools, and of course we would have moving costs. So that is kind of the general impact of closing an elementary school. We have not identified an elementary school. If you hear a rumor that we have, it's false rumor. We are just talking generically an elementary school. Okay? Ms. Glennon, take questions now, go through some. How do you want to handle it?
How do you want to do this, board? You want to ask questions in, like, maybe once we get through the school piece?
Everybody has them.
Or now?
No, that makes sense.
What is that defined as school piece, the first
Well,
three?
the
first
first 3,
three.
ask
Yeah.
questions.
After the
That makes
first
sense.
No
Sorry.
more questions? We'll go through the first 3
Okay.
pieces about schools and then.
And it's important, particularly in these first 3, that we're working with estimates. Like when we finally get down to, if this is the decision, We need to look at every bus route. We need to look at every kid and where they live. We need to look at every school. So the closing of an elementary school has a potential of being the most disruptive because it impacts all 8 elementary schools. And we're rerouting. There isn't an elementary school in our estimates that wouldn't be touched by this decision. Not every kid would be impacted, so we're not moving every kid, but all elementary schools in some way would be impacted, okay? Closing a middle school would result in a $1.7 million savings in the first year. It would require us likely to redistrict based on current high school lines. So do a specific middle high school feeder on both sides of town. Would require us to relocate 396 students, 93 staff members, layoffs, class size increase potentials, space utilization issues similar to the elementary schools I described, reorganizing transportation, and may increase in cost depending on the number of kids on routes. Do we have to add a bus? Do we have to add routes? Again, relocating specialized programming, and there would be a domino effect of redistricting. So all 3 middle schools obviously would be impacted by this. A potential increase in facility costs, moving costs, and obviously we'll speak out into the universe. We're talking about Harborside, and if that's the case, it would actually save us $28 million plus renovation upgrades, because that middle school is in the capital improvement plan and has not been approved by the city yet, but it is in the lineup, and a middle school that needs renovating. So that is about a $28 million ticket. And finally, closing the academy is a savings of about $500,000. The academy provides educational programming for our secondary level students who present with an elevated risk of not completing high school if they attend law or foreign. If I could just say honestly, we'd be moving children who are at greatest risk, who need probably a very high level of stability. They typically have notable emotional and/or behavioral needs that exceed the programming capabilities of our comprehensive high schools. If the academy were to close, these students would return to their school within a school program. So we would have to create something that would function alongside the comprehensive high school within that same building. And we'd have to design that. We don't necessarily have that now. So a subset of these students would likely not still be successful in the comprehensive high school. Therefore, we would likely need to go out of district for specialized programming, and that averages around $85,000 a student. So we baked in some of those savings and costs into the $500,000, but not all, because we'd have to look at each child one by one and make programming decisions based on each child. So this is a wild card estimate. We would obviously, if we were closing the academy, have to look at each child that attends and ask ourselves, can he or she attend the comprehensive high school? If not, where would the best placement be for that child, which potentially could increase costs? So I'm not sure that we would find a great savings by closing the academy. Happy to take questions.
Questions from board members on these 3 pieces? Mr. DeYoung?
Thank you. On actually all 3, you've noted increased cost in 2 spots. Both seem to be unemployment compensation and transportation. I assume those are not the only 2 increase in costs.
Those are the only 2 we can estimate at this time.
Okay. And then the other question I had for you was both the Harborside closing and the potential elementary school closing mentioned increased class sizes. Do you have an estimate on elementary school and middle school class sizes and how high that would go?
So, so class size is interesting, right? Even though we would, in this model, we would maintain the 2023 guideline.
Okay.
It's a mathematical kind of gamble, right? So even with the current model, so at 2023 in K2 we have 20. So if you have 39 children in first grade, well, you're going to be living with 19 and 20 kids in the room, right? If you have 41 kids, Well, now you're living with 3 classes of like 14, 15. So the more children you redistribute into schools, you have the potential of hitting a scenario like the 39, and you also have the potential of hitting a scenario like a 41. So that's hard to estimate until we get to identifying the school, and then we have to take each child, see what street they live on, what grade they're in, what school they'll go to, and then we can run the numbers on how many FTEs we'll need. Then we'll have to see, in some of our schools, despite some thinking, we'd have to find classroom space for these kids if we're adding classrooms, because we have specialized programs. So we'd be bumping some specialized programming, and in worst case scenarios, I mean, how do you put some of these great programs on carts now that's less than a quality educational experience, right? So that's hard to guess right now without knowing the specific school and the kids.
But, so you're not necessarily insinuating that the current level that we have it set at in our policy, our recommended, the Board of Ed recommended guidelines would increase? You're just saying that...
That's in the next scenario.
Okay. All right.
If we don't close a school, then we have to take a look at multiple buckets, and that's one of the...
Okay, so we can address that when we get
Yeah.
there. Okay, thanks.
Mr. Pellicetti?
Dr. Matai, redistricting is a mammoth undertaking, even in the best of weather. Are you confident, I mean, it's basically April now, that the district could do this with fidelity in the short amount of time that we have? I mean,
that's the only thing we would be doing. If we close a middle school, all middle school administrators, any leaders at that building, like teacher leaders, school counselors, psych, social worker, curriculum leaders, our entire cabinet, like that's, because we won't make this decision until May, actually. So the Board of Aldermen would have to vote, you all would have to vote on what we do, and then, so we're just running some preliminary things in the background, kind of like just in case scenarios, which is efficient because of the May timeline, but may not be a good use of our time, but we want to be ready. But I'm glad you called that out, because we have to tell children, families, I don't know, maybe by the second week of August, what's happening, right? So that would be June, July, so 3 months to pull off redistricting.
it's huge.
Right, so just to call out the truth, right? The elementary school, the redistricting is much greater of a task than the middle school. Middle school lines are, for high school, already drawn. Some of the bus routes already run in that regard, so it's a cleaner close at the middle school level. Now, please don't hear me say that that's what I want, and that's what I think we should be doing, and oh, she favors high, I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying if this were to come to fruition, it's easier to plan for that kind of closing.
Thank you.
Ms. Petrosky?
So first, I just wanted to say, I'm so distressed that we're actually having this conversation. I think everybody feels the same way. But obviously, we need to live in reality. And I guess from my perspective, I'm wondering, aside from just the timeline and the ability to execute something like this, closing any one of these schools, in our past, we've done it, we've achieved savings, and then in the very near future after that, we've changed how we did our K-5. We did a whole bunch of stuff, and I think in the end, my guess is we didn't really make any savings in the longer term. So I'm concerned if our levels of attendance are evening out and flatlining now, are we setting ourselves up for a bigger headache in the future by following the path of closing a school?
that a rhetorical question for us to think about?
Well, I do feel like it's, obviously, everything needs to be on the table. This is a huge cut in the budget. It doesn't really even cover our contractual obligations, never mind unfunded mandates. So there are definitely things we need to look at and come up with solutions for. What I'm concerned with is that the solutions we have on the table at the moment are very short-term and may come back to bite us in the not quite so short-term, but not long-term either.
Concern noted. That's a good point. You mentioned that, you said first year only for the, some of the estimated savings. Can you just explain that a little further?
Well, and Mr. Shall I jump in at any time? I'm a better storyteller around this than my numbers professional here, but, so we're gonna take, let's just say elementary school, it's a $1.2 million savings that first year. But then our baseline budget is baseline budget. Like,
Okay.
we're not gonna take a $1.2 million savings every year. There isn't gonna be a minus sign. Less one elementary school now. Like, that's not gonna be baked in. You don't see that with Simon Lake, right? Close Simon Lake and the budget's increasing. Like, it's just a matter of doing business as an educational system. So it's a one-time saving. I believe closing a building is a one-time saving.
Yes, you're absolutely correct.
Numerically, it's correct.
Yeah. It's, as Dr. Kataya said, we would be closing a school to generate the savings
Yeah.
to be able to conduct business and teach the kids for this coming school year. But that's your baseline. And then from there, you're starting all over again with a new budget.
So we'll still have a 2.71 contractual increase next year.
Right.
Like that doesn't negate the future, we're not suddenly gonna come in around 1%.
And so I don't see here in a cost associated with looking at closing a school, redistricting, et cetera. Are you confident we could do this on our own, or would you need a consultant to help?
We haven't discussed that.
Okay, fair enough.
But past history,
We
we
needed
needed
help.
a consultant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you need someone to pull all your
Correct,
roads.
right, and that's not, it's
And
not
where
inexpensive.
kids live
that's
and
my
map
point.
it out on technology. Otherwise, we're literally printing things out and going, okay, where do you live? And like, so
Right.
there are experts that can
Correct.
lay this out technologically, that if we're only given 3 months, we're gonna need that.
Okay, yep. Ms. Wolf-Boynton?
I'd just like to build off what Ms. Petrowski said, that idea that we have to live in this reality. It truly feels like an alternative reality that we are living in right now. I cannot believe that this is happening. I'd like to applaud the 4 members of the Board of Aldermen who are here in the audience tonight. I wish all of them were here, because there certainly are a lot of mistruths and misunderstandings about the budget going around. My question, based off what Mr. Pellicetti said, is, so it sounds like, as difficult as it might be, redistricting could be done within the amount of time, though I imagine between the start of that process and the first week of August, when children find out, there's going to be so much stress and anxiety. Gosh, hope all those counselors are gonna be there to help those kids out. But, so the vision of the learner, right, is one of the things that people come to Milford for, right? Families come to Milford, single mothers come to Milford with their children, because that they know that their child's individual needs are going to be met within our system. And that's where my question goes. We can get a redistricting done, as you answered Mr. Pellicetti, in that short amount of time, but can we do it well? Making sure that our children are all having their needs met, so that they are not also individually taking that kind of step back because we miss something, because we're doing something A, unnecessary in my humble opinion, and B, so quickly.
You know, you're you're wanting me to make a public promise that, like, we'll get it done. But there has to be some grace extended that if we get a few roads wrong in a neighborhood, like, and let's say we hit West Shore at 600 kids and East Shore is at 400, like, certainly we wouldn't want to shoot for that whoopsie daisy, but, you know, we'll get it done. And if there has to be a course correction thereafter, clearly that's not what we're shooting for. I mean, you're making a decision to redistrict likely the second week of May. Now, if you know anything about our world in May and June, that's not time to take on any extra projects, right? So I would imagine, Ms. Wolf Boynton, that we're going to put a lot of things on hold all of a sudden. There's some things that may not happen as well as they usually would landing the plane in a school year. If it's the middle school, we're pulling middle school staff to come tend to it. We can't do it to them. They have to be part of it, right? So we'll make it work. We'll do it. That's what we're here for. We'll make it work. And we're kind of sort of running some scenarios now, but you can't really, let's say it's an elementary school. I have to wait on you to decide which one. Like, I can't run 8 scenarios.
Yes,
Ms. Doyle?
for now, thank you.
All right. Thank you for the very comprehensive presentation. I very much appreciated that so far and putting the context forward. I too am extraordinarily disappointed by the idea of us sitting here and spending time doing this instead of other policy work that could be going forward. I'm going to come back to Mr. DeYoung's question. So my first question is say we had a 39-41 split, and then we come to the decision, or you need to move to a 3 classrooms instead of 2 classrooms in that case. There's not necessarily space in that even afterwards, because students enter the district even after the first of the year and the redistricting has already occurred. So
We do add classrooms. It depends on the school and the principal and the makeup of that group of children, but after the first day of school, albeit very unpopular with parents, we do add sections because it does give a lower class size. So it's not unheard of. And depending on what school, we'd be able to find the space or not. So just really, the answer to that is it depends.
it depends.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, so my next question is specifically on the closing of a middle school. So in here it says locating 396 students. So for simplicity's sake, that's 200 students extra at each school. That's a significant increase. And we're gonna save $28 million on renovation upgrades. Do we have room for 200 students at each middle school without spending money on upgrades? I mean, are we just pulling from one place to put to another place in the long term, short term? Is it students in trailers? What is that
And it's gonna
realistically
be
looks
tight
like?
at West Shore, even with the reno, because we have specialized programming now. Like, we have these great art rooms. You're not gonna be putting like Spanish in there, right? It potentially will move to a swing space model where some spaces will have to be shared by multiple teachers. I'm not sure about the dedicated classroom model. We have talked with the principal on reconvening some space in the cafeteria stage area. So we might, did you bake it into this?
No.
Some? All right, so we would likely be incurring some costs in the future to accommodate. I do want to float out, though, that before any of the renovations, it's been told to me historically that those 2 middle schools have had actually like 500-600 kids there, right? So this, for me, falls under the category of when I went to school, right? Okay, so that might be the case, but I would call into question, did we have the specialized programming as we do over at East Shore? And that program keeps how many kids here, Mr. Brown?
8 to 10, depending on the year right now.
So we're able to keep 8 to 10 of our kids here in our school system, not place them at a district at $85,000 each. And they're part of their home system. They take up 2 classrooms, I think, because part of it is life skills.
That's just for East Shore. We also have 3 programs at Harborside that we would have to find space for.
So 3 programs, specialized programs at Harborside. So Yes, those two schools held that number of kids, so we should be out front about that. But we didn't have the programming that we do today, so we'd have to make some modifications on how we serve kids, where they're being served, et cetera.
So realistically, you're saying that even if we had the initial $1.7 million savings, there are a lot of hidden costs in decreasing the two schools into just the two schools and middle schools that we really can't anticipate. We can't anticipate how many students we can fit in these specialized programs at Harborside into the two schools that may require out-of-district placement that could cost $250,000 if there's 4 students.
Right, we have not calculated any costs for students that are going out of district in these numbers. And, you know, we wouldn't be able to pull off renovations during the summer.
Right.
Our costs would be moving costs, they would be, it would become, fit these kids into the school as best we can
That's a
with
good
the
way to put it.
scheduling, working with the administrators and the teachers on the scheduling. But it's gonna be tight. It's definitely gonna be tight. We wouldn't be doing any renovation this summer. It would be strictly moving.
Right, okay. Well, let's just say this, Ms. Doyle, we're not recommending that you close Harborside before this. We recommended a $28 million reno.
Right.
Like, otherwise, we'd come to you and say, guess what? We have room at West Shore and East Shore, makes a great plan, let's close Harborside. That has not been part of our recommendation. So this would be, fitting kids in is a good way to describe that.
And I think you mentioned our Careers to Pathways program, and so that would, in the long run, would significantly impact our ability to actually meet that goal of increasing the ability of career pathways because of a lack of space and also lack of FTEs possibly to accomplish that.
You know, so if we were going to do a glimpse into the future, I see us going to a student choice-based elective system at the middle school. So we would expand our options in art and music likely for it to be much more specialized. We also have plans to expand the tech ed courses there and possibly other courses in physical fitness and health, et cetera. So that, in a perfect world, likely would mean decreased class sizes because you start to get specialized. It's like AP, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't not run AP because you have 6 kids who are interested in it. You, like, yay, we have 6 kids in it. We want to run that. Would require more space and likely more FTE in the future. So, like I said in my slide presentation, some of our recommendations are going to demonstrate most minimally a slowdown of progress, and in some cases a shutdown. And so in this case, the middle school career paths would be significantly slowed.
So I have an additional question is, obviously in closing an elementary school or a middle school or an academy provides the most ETE, FTE reduction initially in that space. One of the things we've been focusing on throughout Milford is attracting talent and long-term planning for talent. And so how will that impact us in the long
so
term
glad
to
you
be able
mentioned
to
that.
say, we just caught 40 teachers that we've been struggling and spending thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, to invest in our community and develop that relationship framework.
So I will say, we have made the decision, the HR department has decided not to pink slip anybody right now. That would just add fuel to the fire, right? Because we really don't know what we're doing yet. And Milford has experienced the pink slip syndrome. We didn't recover from that probably for a couple of few years. So the talent pool in the world of teaching is slim right now. COVID did something. People, I'm in touch with universities. Their pipeline has dried up. They have very few undergrad students in their education departments. In the graduate programs that I am involved in, we are begging people to engage in advanced career degrees. So we have been fortunate to a degree where, up until recently, I would say, we've had good experience with recruitment. We're starting to feel the pinch on the quality and quantity of the pool. And we've really hit some snags with world language. Special ed is usually a hard to fill place. But if you think about it, the power is in the hands of teachers right now when it comes to finding a job. So if you're a new graduate, you're in an environment where you can shop around right now. And there's like a bad case of poaching going on in our system, where particularly September, October, there were some doors that were swinging around going, all right, somebody left for this district, but we grabbed somebody from this district, right? It was just happening across the state of Connecticut. And so I'm worried about recruitment if they're hearing that we are potentially laying off people. I don't know if there is an applicant that has potentially an offer from Milford and one from X district. There's, to some degree, you're going to do your homework and say, so how many teachers did you lay off last year? Because it's usually seniority based. So your newest leave first. So I can't look into the crystal ball and make a determination, but we certainly have to consider the impact on that.
Okay, and then my last question is on the academy. These serve our most vulnerable students in the long run. Aside from the space issue, I'm genuinely worried that we're just going to lose just graduation rate and not be able to support these children in the future, either without a great increase in costs or just generally not doing what's best for the children and allowing them to have an equal access to educational opportunities that we provide to every other student who isn't in the academy. And so how, can you just explain what that would do in terms of what it was like before the academy, before I joined the board, and understanding what the academy is in terms of really kind of what that would do for students, like services?
I don't know the history of pre-academy.
It's been 2 decades.
Oh, so that.
So when I went to school,
High school here.
there's a danger of me overusing that phrase. So what would it look like? It would be a school within a school. I think if I was a student, I'd feel incredibly segregated and not really honored, and I'm not sure that there would be a high level of sense of belonging. So I'm going to run a parallel track in the same physical building, and a lot of our kids that go to the academy are there because they can't handle the big building for different reasons, right? And a reset in culture, climate is what's needed. And it's not a bad thing, it's just, they just need a different environment. And they could be highly successful there. If you attended any academy graduation, you know the miracles that are pulled off there. I think it would be incredibly short-sighted of our school system to close the academy. I'm worried about the hidden costs, not just financial, Ms. Doyle.
So that brings a last point, and then I'll be done for this time. I went to Harborside, and then I went to Jonathan Law. Many of my classmates went to Foreign from Harborside. And one thing I do like about the 3 middle schools is the fact that Harborside does divide. So you have this mixing of the 2 sides of Milford, so that when you come to the high school, it's not just Foreign students and Law students, and that's who you're going to be for the rest of the entire community. Is that my nieces and nephews who are in the high school have parents who go to Foreign, who are part of the baseball team, part of the softball team. And so I think we'd be losing a lot of community aspect by closing a middle school in some ways. Can you talk about the impact in terms of diversity and equity, in terms of how that might affect things in our community aspects in creating a more divided community?
You know, I think there's another side of the coin for that. There might be some people listening saying, actually, it would encourage and strengthen community, right? That you're going from 4 elementary schools to 1 middle, 1 high, and that strengthens a student body and a community that follows that that line, right? I worry about forms of equity now, actually, because we need to get Harborside renovated. That their physical space doesn't allow for some of the curricular experiences. So I'm champion, keep Harborside open and renovate it, right? Build out, build up something. We gotta give them a few extra spaces that are more conducive to their electives particularly, and sciences. I don't know that I could speak to the diversity piece. I'm not sure how to answer that, but So I'd have to give that some thought. I'm sorry, I don't know how to answer your question more eloquently than that.
That's okay. No, I take your point, and I think that's important as well. That's it, I'm done.
Can I mention also, Ms. Glennon, I was just told that the decision to close Simon Lake was made in May. So it's been done.
I think it was discussed a little earlier.
Oh, was it?
I think they started to talk about it sooner than May, before, but
I don't know if they're.
But obviously, they
historians.
didn't actually they didn't firm up the decision until after the final vote. You know, I know in terms of the middle school piece and what Ms. Doyle was just talking about, I see with my own, you know, friends that have middle school and high school age kids and my own grandchild, they do, I think, they do tend to have a lot of friends across town because of sports and other extracurricular activities. So, I mean, to me, that's, I think there's other considerations that might take, for me, priority over that. I mean, I do see a lot of, the kids do seem to have friends all across town, for the most part. But, I mean, there's a lot to go into a lot to consider. Ms. McDonough-Souza?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that presentation, Dr. Kataya. And I also would like to say how distressing this is that we're talking about this, but it needs to be talked about, so thank you. And I sense that your answer is going to be that this question is a little premature, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Just looking, obviously I skipped ahead and was looking at the estimated savings for everything else that we're about to go over, but it's clear that closing Harborside would give us the greatest cost savings and would get us, you know, this is an imperfect estimate,
Right.
I realize, but it would get us almost to that $1.8 million cut. And so is it an oversimplified way of looking at it that, like, I guess my question is, do you have a preference that of cutting one quote unquote line item, such as closing the middle school, over having to stack so many of these other potential cuts that, you know, is there any preference there?
So, you're just running to the end of the meeting.
Yes.
For a minute. So, Emily, let's just cut to the chase.
Okay.
Closing a school is cleaner,
Yeah.
because we haven't gotten there yet. But as we get into the other spreadsheets, we're gonna have to dip from many buckets to get to 1.8. And some of them, to me, are devastating, if you look at the spreadsheet. Like, one of them is to completely roll back on elementary world language. Like, just throw us back 4 years now. Like, whew, that is like, that would be heartbreaking. Eliminating the elementary STEM, because I'm going after like the biggies, right? 8.0 FTE slash, 8.0 FTE slash, you know, and because if you think about it, I'm just go back to the charts. Like 71% of our budget's in salaries, so, and programming equals staffing, and staffing equals programming. So if we say we're gonna roll back 1.8, there are a lot of buckets to dip into, a lot. I mean, even at the high school, and we're going into the spreadsheet, but we're talking about 4.0 FTEs per high school. That's 8. So what you're doing is increasing class size and possibly eliminating some smaller courses. We took a look at the support we provide teachers through teacher leaders at the district. We deploy teacher leaders to do side-by-side professional learning. That helps in our professional learning line. We don't have to spend as much there. And it's a Milford teacher that provides us support in curriculum and HQI. Well, we're not going to hire that person. It's a recommended elimination. So that has an impact on HQI rollout and curriculum rollout. So, but that's an FTE. So that's 80,000. I got many more of those to get to, right? BCBA support. We're just paraprofessionals. Reducing summer school, reducing curriculum work, putting a 10%, 20% freeze on per pupil expenditures. Freshman sports is on here. Like, but all those are small. Like freshman sports is $75,000 in total. Like you need a lot of those to get to 1.8, and I've just decimated sports for freshman kids. Like, that's a big hit for a $75,000 trade-in. 8 FTEs at STEM, that's a big hit. Like our dream of creating scientists at the age of 5, you know, like, that's a big hit for, what's that number at STEM? 350,000. But now I need like 5 more of those.
But in fairness, there's, at the end of the list, there's a lot of potential reductions that don't include any FTEs. But
Yes.
again, it's these, they're all tiny amounts of money.
Right, so
We
radio,
need many of
security
them.
radio replacement, 16,000. But you need a lot of radios to get to 1E. Textbooks, reducing the proposed position in HR, not running a course, which is not necessarily an FTE. Musical instruments, robots, the ukuleles and guitars, so, but those are just much smaller pieces. Like, you'll need a lot more puzzle pieces to get to 1.8 when you go that route.
A lot more. Yeah. Okay.
So it's not gonna be my preference, it's a dialogue, I think, amongst the board members of what's the strategy to get to 1.8 is something that we need to think about between now and May.
Thank you.
Mr. Dion?
Thank you. I just want to go back to this idea about redistricting. I presume if you were to come to the board under a non-emergency, I consider this somewhat of an emergency situation, and suggest to us that we do some sort of redistricting, whether it's close a middle school, close an elementary school, you would have an idea of the ideal timeline as to what you would need to actually do that in a responsible and appropriate way. So, maybe unfairly, but I'm asking you, what would that timeline be?
Exactly unfairly, but,
If you want me to chime in, when we
Yeah,
did it the last
great.
time, we did it, it took a year. We did it a year in advance. We
Okay.
said, you know, we're gonna redistrict and go back when we went back to K2, K5 from the K2, 3-5.
But you weren't closing a school then?
We didn't close the school
No.
then, we just went back to K2, 3-5.
Right.
And but we did it in a year. We purposely said we're gonna do this in the next year. So it was almost a year that it took.
So you're talking 12 months instead of 2? Okay.
3.
3, sorry. Thank you.
Any other questions on the school piece still?
Sorry,
Ms.
last
Doyle?
question. It comes back to Mr. Dion's point, is when you're talking about closing a school or any redistricting process, you just said, talking about it has taken a lot of your energy already, of that's gonna be what's gonna be going on. Not talking about it, but will be what the focus is if we chose the middle school, for example, for the long term. What does that mean in terms of reductions in other priorities of whether curriculum development or any of those kind of transitioning your focus only to redistricting? How does that decrease the district's progress?
It just, so the end of the school year, I guess from a district perspective, is a little different than school perspective, right? So you have very busy student-focused activities that closes out a school year. But for a school district, we're actually ramping up for summer work, so we're not landing the plane, but we're about to take off. So we have hopefully a record attended HQI Live experience happening in July. I said to Dr. Fedigan, I'm not sure that we'll be able to run the 4 experiences. We might need to cut back and run 2 if this goes through. We pull teachers to do a lot of curriculum work in the summer. I'm not sure if our administrators, school leaders, teacher leaders would be able to dedicate their time to do that. We might need to pull them offline. So I think it'd probably be hardest hit on some teaching and learning work, which is core to our mission. I don't know that anybody would see it disruptive in schools, because kids are still gonna focus on kids, they're gonna have a great end of year experience. But it's mostly the workings behind the scene. So we may not start with a new curriculum next September.
we may not have same offerings for professional learning. We have talked about pulling way back on summer school and only offering what we're legally obligated. No remedial intervention kind of summer school at all for elementary and middle and high. So that would probably be an impact on kids. If we have to do this, we need our resources here to do this. So we've actually slowed some things down already. We have gone a little slower on summer school hiring, a little slower on HQI live planning. So we're just trying to take signals and be prepared.
Okay, great, thank you.
We ready to move on to the rest of the list? Oh, Ms. Wolf-Boynton?
One more, just based off of what you just said, Dr. Kataya, that idea of us kind of slowing down while we're in limbo. You know, if we should be so fortunate as to not experience these cuts, are we going to be in a position to be able to go full force as normal with curriculum, summer school, everything, even if we don't know until late April or May?
We'd still be sending out invitations for summer school and,
Yeah.
yeah.
We
So
just
we're
might
still
have to
doing
say-
the planning for HQI Live. So the last minute work that we'd be doing every district, we're just put into our teaching and learning work.
Okay, so we're not in a holding pattern right now that could harm what we have as long as we're,
No, we won't let that happen.
okay.
We ready to move on? Ms. Petrosky?
I do have one question I'd like to ask about the fact that we are still in recovery mode from the pandemic. And I'm concerned about the impact of basically stopping all operations in order to have this very big lift of closing a school. And what is the concern on the progress we are making at the moment on our kids' education? I mean, obviously with the pandemic, everybody was a bit behind. We've put into place some great programming to get them back up to speed, but I kind of feel like we're throwing them for a second loop, if you will, by doing this. Is that the case? Am I misunderstanding something?
Well, it depends on what we do. So, like I stated, I think it slows down our progress and in some cases takes us backwards. And we have the same concern as the rest of the nation, and particularly in Connecticut, where in some content areas we're having a hard time, our kids are having a hard time bouncing back. So if you saw, the governor announced last couple of days math tutoring academies that are going to be funded by the state. And because their the statewide math scores are so, they're kind of low. So, and that is a response to COVID. So, Ms. Petrosky, it's hard for me to know how to answer that without knowing where we're going on cuts. So, you know, we have a proposal to eliminate one instructional coach per school. Well, going to instructional coaches at elementary was very deliberate. That wasn't an accident, oh, let's move people around. It was a very strategic move to move away from an intervention model, which is a whole presentation in itself if the board wants it, and move toward a teacher capacity building model to help more kids. So now we're going to shortchange that, helping teachers with new curriculum, new state mandates that are coming left and right, and then helping students that are struggling. So just with that one act of removing an instructional coach, we'll see an immediate impact on kids and teachers in that regard related to academic progress post-COVID. So it depends.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like it's there is no lesser of two evils here. There's no lesser.
I'm going to assume that, I think Ms. Petrosky might have been referring to closing a school with her question.
Oh,
Maybe not, but it's a concern that I've had. I mean, that we're just coming off the pandemic. Our kids they need those relationships. They need staff that they're accustomed to. It's, so concerning to think about splitting them up from their comfort zones now, when where their, I mean, when their resilience is probably at the lowest point it ever is, in terms
And I would
of-
extend that to our staff members too, Ms. Clement.
Yes,
Um,
staff as well. Mhm.
I mean, it's jarring.
Mhm.
And it'd be impossible to think like we're gonna do it without skipping a beat. Like, no one's gonna guarantee that. Like, so
Correct.
we'll redistrict and we open school and you gotta get to a new normal. So there's that like learning curve for the adults and the kids. So, we're just getting to a new normal, like kind of, stabilizing. And potentially we'll be jarring that again.
That's exactly my point. And yet, when you look at, peeking ahead, which I know you don't want us to be doing, but there's, I look at this and I say, how are we ever going to get to 1.8 million with all of these tiny reductions? So,
And if we do take dips from lots of buckets, when do we bring that back online?
correct, right.
Like, if the climate is that there's a cap on the Board of Ed budget, then how do you revive STEM educators? When do you bring back 8 FTEs? We're able to do that because of the FTE savings I was talking about, and we were trading in.
Mhm.
That's the perfect time to do it. So we didn't increase the budget by 4% at that time, but now so if we were to remove some of these things on this spreadsheet, the question that should be asked is, how will we be able to bring it back? What budgetary climate allows to bring it back?
So, with what you just said, I think going back to the, I've been thinking this for a while now, that we had such small increases, even what we requested. I mean, we had in recent years, going back to 2016-17, less than 1%, less than 2%. We've gotten ourselves to a point where we just cannot absorb those tiny percents anymore. And I do remember in my years on the board, going back that far, most of those years, our contractual obligations were greater than the dollar amounts that we were asking for, that we asked for, what we asked for in our budgets, not what we were given, but what we asked for. The dollar amount of our contractual obligations was less than, greater than what we were asking for. And, we've been doing more with less for a long time, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Not getting credit for it as far as I'm concerned, but doing more with less. And it's clear that, we've gotten to a point where we just can't, it's difficult, if not impossible, to absorb that.
Well, the good news is we've created a very lean system.
Mhm.
Like, we've intentionally worked on that.
Yes.
We're a very efficient working system, but you can't get any more efficient. Here it is, like, just our contractual increases
Mhm.
and all those other things we talked about. So I think it'll be hard to get back to the years of 14 to 20. I don't know how we're gonna do that if we're interested in progress.
And in my opinion, our families want progress. That's what I see anecdotally. I see families that want progress, they want innovation, they want the best experience they can get for their kids. They want us to be a model school district. I see people, on social media weekly. There's, numerous posts from people who are thinking of moving to Milford. They have young kids. Just moved to Milford. They have young kids. They ask, what about the schools? And almost universally, the comments are positive. We have great schools, and we do have great schools. We've worked really, really hard to get where we are right now.
And we're
So-
able to attract some of the best teachers.
Mhm. And that's been clear as well. The teachers come here and they like working here. They want to stay. So,
So Ms. Clinton, there are a lot of lines. I don't know how you want to progress through this.
I'm looking at them and wondering the same thing. Ms. McWhorton, did you have?
It's a quick question. As I'm trying to wrap my head, like so many of us are, I think, around this process, and what's going on, I watched a good hunk of the very excellent presentation that your administration and Ms. Glennon gave to the Board of Finance about how lean this budget was. As we look now at all these potential cuts, I'm just curious, did anyone from the Board of Finance or the mayor come to you and ask what the possible ramifications would be in advance of making their decision?
Well, I don't think we had that particular conversation.
No.
So the answer is no.
Ms.
No,
Doyle?
ma'am.
Thank you.
One thing we haven't talked about at all is ESSER and ARP grants that we had because of the pandemic. Can you give me an idea of how much money came in for federal grants because of the pandemic?
But remember, those come with strings, and they
Yes.
expire in '24.
Right, but my point of
So-
asking is more of, we've just been discussing how lean the budget is, and we've been able to make improvements in very unfortunate circumstances, a windfall that we were not expecting in some ways. To be able to progress the district, using that money to advance goals and reallocate money to things that we had hoped to do in some ways. Can you get an idea of what the monies are, or what has been used, because I can't remember off the top of my head.
Sure, it is in your budget book, the exactly which grants and the total amount, but it's about 9.1 million.
Okay.
You can go to
And
page
some of that
G.
had restrictions on it that could only be used for special ed, for instance, or Title I.
But for the most part, those costs would have been borne by the district otherwise.
So let's talk about that a minute. We were out front and clear, transparent. When we first got ESSER, we were already talking about counselors. It was still already a desire of mine to bring that to you. We made a decision, let's onboard all of them now. It's COVID. We need help, right? Our kids need help. And transparently, I shared with this board and other bodies that we were going to bring them little by little over the next 3 years. What has been at the center of some of the conversation of the reduction is, why do we need counselors? I'm happy to redo all of the presentations we've done. I don't know how many times Mr. Brown and I are developing and giving this presentation. I feel like we've made the case for counselors. So at this point, I believe it's just personal opinion that we don't need counselors. But I was transparent. When we first got ESSER, I said, we're not going to create a 50 FTE funding cliff, and we're not going to create even a 12. We're going to create 4, 4, and 4. So every year, we're going to take on 4 FTEs because of a need. So we made that very upfront decision to onboard 4 FTEs each year because of a need. I'm happy to sit down with anybody to talk about counselors and why, from my professional opinion, we need one in every elementary school, and we need additional help in middle. So there are real research-based reasons why we need that additional support that a social worker and a school psychologist is not giving, and nor would a third-party agency in the city of Milford be able to give.
They wouldn't be qualified to give it anyway in this instance because the specific legislation that was passed in 2018 requires that we have a K-12 comprehensive certified school counseling program that every child has access to that is delivered by a certified school counselor. Do I have that right, Mr. Brown? I've got it down now. And that's the legislation that happened prior to COVID. COVID didn't create the need, COVID exacerbated the need, right? And exacerbated our, kind of accelerated our wanting to bring them on board. But they are certified teachers, they're not clinicians. They're certified teachers that are trained to deliver this curriculum. So, it's, in many cases, it's apples and oranges with some of the stuff that we're hearing about, why can't you just do X, Y, Z?
But I'll just finish, I completely agree, I think that was the best use of moving the money, because we don't have to worry about this, because we've already demonstrated, and you've demonstrated through this, is that we've done excellent budgeting to make sure that we use the resources wisely. And one of the things I remember from your budget conversation when we talked about this is we started as a zero budget. It's not starting at the beginning and then we're adding, we're starting at zero and we're looking at those cuts of the four boxes of which is the most value for the lowest cost and the high cost, low value, and how do we look at those programs. It's extraordinarily disheartening to say once again that we are even having this conversation here, because to think about eliminating a STEM program for $350,000. I mean, Mr. Riccitelli said to me one day, we spent $10,000 like it's nothing, because everything costs $10,000 in my mind. Like, nothing is inexpensive. We are servicing our community, and I am extraordinarily satisfied with the work that the administration has done and brought us here. And I'm sorry we're having this conversation once again.
Mr. DeYoung?
Thank you. I just wanted to make a quick comment on the ESSER and ARP grants. I think there's this feeling that we got $9 million and just went on a spending spree. It's clearly not what happened. Mr. Riccitelli has been very detailed every month and every quarter about what we have spent this money on. In the 2 years that we were really going in the depths of it, we got reports every single meeting about what that money was spent on, where it was going, and what the need was. And it's not like we went out and said, here's 10 of our biggest projects that we wanted to work on, and we all of a sudden have $9 million to use it. It's clearly not the case with the counselors, but broadly with the ESSER grant and the ARP grant, that's not what happened. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but we still have COVID expenses that we're expending out of those grants, correct? Mm-hmm. So I think it's just such a disingenuous thing for people to say we had this, I know you just used the word, but to say that we have this windfall of money. It's not a windfall of money. It was an emergency. Mm-hmm. And it needed to be handled, and money was one of the ways to handle it. And we did a remarkable job. And I would say, if anybody questions that, go back and watch meetings in 2020, 2021. They're on YouTube. Go watch them, because we did a remarkable job.
And my
Or
point
you
is
did a
that
remarkable job.
if we didn't have that money, that $1 million would have needed to come from our budget and would have caused even more severe cuts in our district. And I think we were fortunate enough to get that money to support the emergency.
Absolutely.
Are we ready to move on to the rest of the list? I don't know any other way to do it but to just dive in.
Can I clump some
and-
together?
Yeah, yes, I think that would make sense.
Like, maybe we can like run through the rest of page one before anybody interrupts?
Yes.
Is that good?
Yeah, yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. Maybe a little. This is, I said to my staff today, this is going to be very emotional tonight. So you all serve on this board for a reason, and I understand how emotional this is for you, and please know it is for us and likely people in the audience. So my jokes are just to kind of come up for air a little bit. Okay, so the rest of page one refers to increasing class size at the elementary level, going from 2023 to 21-24. That would result in a 7.0 FTE decrease. Gives us about 311. Now, there is an explanation on some of these. Do you want to give it to them or not right now?
About the 21,
Yes.
26? Sure.
Okay.
You might be asking, where did we come up with the 44,550? And whenever there's eliminations in staff in the MEA contract, it's usually by seniority. So the lowest paid, the newest, and most of the time lowest paid teachers are the ones who are laid off. And we estimate that lowest paid teacher to be about $55,000, but we can't take a whole $55,000 as the savings because of the way the fiscal years land. And so we have to take 21/26, approximately 81% of the $55,000, which comes out to the $44,550. Because the way the teachers contract, it's from September 1 to August 30th, but the fiscal year starts in June. So if we had to lay off teachers this summer, we would still have to pay them until September 1st. So.
And that's the number we use
Right.
when you see 44.5.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I already explained the eliminating instructional coach. I won't do that again unless you have questions. We talked about delaying world language in grade 5, so that's one of the system improvements that's baked into the budget. We would just not go to grade 5. We would let kids do world language for the 4th grade and then pick back up in 6th grade. The, again, possibility of removing world language altogether is there. You'll see over and over that we believe this is a significant step back. Eliminating elementary STEM is on the list, a program that has already quickly become deeply rooted in our elementary schools and turning kids on to science very quickly. And then in the music world, starting strings and band in 5th grade that rather than 4th grade. And well, you know what's happening in music in our district. It's just really taken off for young people. We believe that we're going to have more musicians because of some of the activities we've been engaging in. So.
Do we have 4 instructional coaches right now per each?
Elementary, yeah.
4, so this would reduce it to 3.
Yes. And that was achieved by moving away from an intervention model where there were 2 coaches, 2 interventionists, and moving toward 4 coaches, and each coach has some responsibility of supporting kids with a large portion of their responsibility supporting teachers to help kids.
So the model did not change, just the number of...
The model itself would not change. The degree of impact would. So now you have 3 people reaching out to a staff of 20, 21, 22, depending on your school, and trying to support through teachers kids who need additional support.
Okay. Questions on these pieces? Mr. DeYoung?
Can we talk about the coaches for one more second? So when you changed the model, you didn't add anybody, right?
No.
There was no additional?
No additional FTEs. Good point.
Thank you. The way it currently is structured now, it's, like you said, teachers teaching, or coaches teaching teachers, right? Is that how
Coaching,
you-
supporting adults.
Right.
Coaches supporting adults for kids, like right on the spot intervention, like, oh my God, this kid is stuck, and putting an extra set of eyes on the kiddo. And then, when needed, supporting really struggling kids.
How do the coaches currently support HQI that we've invested so heavily in?
All day, every day.
Okay. Could you be more specific?
So I think a coach's primary roles would include supporting high-quality instruction by side-by-side teaching, or watch me teach, or I watch you teach, and we provide each other feedback. We have something that we've incorporated throughout the district, although it has different names in different schools. It's something like a learning lab, where coaches are instrumental in helping to orchestrate those. And that gets teachers around kids in our classrooms on any given Tuesday at 10 o'clock. And all of a sudden, we have professional learning happening with our kids, with our teachers. So the best PL investment we can make is through a coach, because it's professional learning every day in our classrooms with our own kids and teachers. They also support the rollout of curriculum. That's a big part of their job. If you've been paying attention, which I know you have, lots of new curriculum at the elementary level in particular. They are and will be instrumental to help support this right to read legislation, particularly in the primary grades. And we're also shifting to new forms of assessment, so they're providing teachers support in that.
And I think it's important to note too that with the coaches performing some of that role of HQI, there's not as much disruption in the classroom, because before you had this model, right, you used to pull teachers out to do HQI live sessions. Is that right?
No. So we're still, when teachers are coming together during a day with the coach, sometimes, not every day, like in the learning lab, teachers are leaving their classroom.
Oh, they are. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Ms. Boynton?
Dr. Kataya, the elimination of elementary STEM, I'm having a flashback, and I might not articulate this 100% correctly, But you say here that we would not be able to teach the standards. I believe we had a presentation not too terribly long ago, right, about the STEM elementary program, about how the standards we were teaching were not just nationally recommended standards, but also that the problem-based learning that they allowed was positive. I mean, there were so many reasons, but one of the reasons it was so beneficial to our students is that it was multidisciplinary. So what they were learning in the science, they were learning skills and abilities that they were going to be able to apply to different classrooms as well.
Yeah, if there's any place where, there's a few places where HQI is naturally happening, the arts, music, and STEM. I think you walk in any given day and kids are just completely immersed, inquiry-based, problem-solving, high levels of student agency, authentic task, and I can't wait for the day that there's a graduate walking across the stage saying, I'm going into the sciences, and I fell in love with science in elementary school. Now, if we were to revert back to an old model of science, which I hope was where your question was going.
Yes.
So it is, right? Okay. So it used to be that teachers were sent kits periodically throughout the year. And we have a staff member that is responsible over at Simon Lake to get the kids that kits have been used and refill them and send them back out. And there were specific kits per grade. I think they range from maybe two to three in each grade. Do you remember, Dr. Oley?
About three
Yeah.
or four, yeah.
So the kit had all the stuff in it. Let's say it's earth science, soil, seeds, little pots, right? And then the teacher it would be delivered to the classroom and say, do this unit. But now I'm an elementary class teacher, so I want to introduce you to the world of elementary teacher. They get a break, like 45 minutes, and they're planning for all subjects, right? So now we're asking teachers to go grab that box and set up a full science lab for their 20 kids and be ready for them when they get back from break or a certain part of the day, and then break it down again. And that's not how you do science. So while that, I think, served a purpose for a time being for us, with the NGSS standards, I think is what you're referring to,
Thank you, yes.
it's not enough. Our kids deserve more science than that. In fact, I would say we're required to provide them with more science than that. So it's not really a lab hands-on experience to the degree that the teachers have the time or the skill set to lay out a lab based on the box we just sent them. So.
But I'm thinking, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, that with the way that we are teaching STEM now, we're not just teaching our kids about a subject area, we're teaching them how to think for themselves.
Yeah.
We're teaching them how to learn that and discover on their own.
So good memory. This is not about just learning, memorizing the content of science, but it's a process of inquiry and how do you think as a scientist, which applies to so many parts of life. So it's the vision of the learner. It's the vision of the learner coming to life.
Thank you.
And any science teacher could tell you that the kids are in this environment, it happens naturally. We have skilled teachers that help them fall in love with the process and the sheer just learning of it, and it just carries over into other rooms. So, I mean, we have elementary kids walking by the lab saying, when is it our turn? And they're like cheering to go down to the lab, and it's co-taught. So teachers are staying with their kids, and there's a benefit of more professional learning, if you will, just by being together in the same room.
Thank you.
Ready to go on to the next page?
Mr. Petrosky has a question.
Ms. Petrosky?
Hi, I just wanted a small clarification on the delay adding world language in elementary grade 5, and then eliminate elementary world language completely. That is a cumulative amount, correct? That 65 is not connected to 311?
The 65 is not including the 11, can't be,
And the
because
311.
this is 7.
Correct.
Yeah. There's currently 7 in the budget. We were proposing 1 additional for grade 5. So that, if you add those two numbers together, it would represent the elimination of all elementary world language.
Completely.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so next page, we continue with the world language, if having to, because we're having a dip into multiple buckets. Eliminating 6th grade world language and having formal world language instruction starting in 7th grade. There are some middle school models like that, it's just not what we provide our kids or have provided. Continue at middle school, reducing a health teacher and PE teacher. This would increase class sizes. These are 2 classes that we feel like maybe there is a vacancy or potential for class sizes to increase a bit because they are pretty average. So the next one's a big one. This would require us to move away from the team model at the middle school, sorry. Right now, in 6th grade, there's a team model where there are a group of teachers who share kids. We would reduce 2 FTEs at each middle school, and the model would go more toward like an elementary model, where there would likely be like a humanities teacher and a math, STEM teacher, and the kids are shared among a couple of teachers, and one teacher would be required to teach more than one subject, as opposed to a 6th grade science teacher, 6th grade math teacher, 6th grade ELA, 6th grade social studies. You'd probably group 2 and 2 together, and then we would, and that's possible because most of our 6th grade teachers are K-6 certified. We'd have to do some homework on that. And that means they are allowed to teach multiple subjects. They're not bound to their subject. That usually starts in 7th grade. And we would have to do some quick training of teachers because if I'm a math teacher, I haven't taught science, so now I need to get caught up on those standards you were just talking about, Ms. Wolf-Whiten. If I'm an English teacher, I haven't likely been teaching social studies, so there's now training required in other content areas for those 6th grade teachers. At the middle school level, eliminating team leaders and curriculum leaders. You could read there the specific parts of their job, but they are instrumental to supporting teachers. So these are stipended positions, and they are positions that help support teachers with student matters, policy, curriculum, training on HQI. So those are positions that in the teacher leader, there would be 7 at each school, and these are stipends. And then in the curriculum leader area, we are proposing funding only core subjects and eliminating the others. So there are curriculum leaders, for example, at the middle school, like special education, the extracurriculars, student support services. So we would roll that back to just fund core subjects. We would take a look at eliminating the middle school greeters, and therefore there are 2 secretaries at the middle school. We would place the responsibility of screening visitors and letting them in and out the door via the 2nd secretary. Cutting the new middle school activity flex stipends. This is something new in the contract and a great benefit to kids. If there are after-school programs that students or staff want to start for kiddos, a teacher can request to start the club and get paid the flex stipend. We would remove those. There are 24 available throughout the district across the 3 middle schools. We talked a little bit about the high school FTE reduction, the elimination of the proposed CNA 1.0 FTE, which would allow more kids to take those courses. The elimination of a high school BCBA assignment. Those duties would be subsumed by a school psychologist, but please know there's no school psychologist in the system that has extra time on their hands. That would probably bump some of their caseload, extend timelines, potentially get us out of compliance with some IDA regulations. So it has a big ripple effect there. And then reducing the high school by 1 custodian each. Certainly that would bring us below industry standard. and would impact timeliness of cleanliness and rotation of cleaning cycles. We'll pause there.
On the high school BCBA assignments, that's the board certified behavioral analyst, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So, can you just expand on that a little bit? So, the word assignment maybe is throwing me off. Is there a certain number in each school, or?
I'm gonna let
is
Mr.
it-
Brown take that.
We have a BCBA who's assigned to the high school and to other schools in the district. So in order to get this elimination, we would move BCBA's assignment at the high school and shift it to our other schools. It'd be a reduction of probably a 0.6 to a 1.0 total.
Okay. So it would, in other words, just reduce her time, the person's,
It'd eliminate the time at the high school.
does that eliminate her time altogether, or just at the high school? I'm having a hard time
There'd be a
with
bumping
this.
process, so let's say it'd be a total, what we're assuming is a total of a 0.6 FTE reduction in BCBA staff for the district.
So it's like somebody would become part-time?
Yes.
Is that a good way to think of it?
That's a good way to think of it.
Okay.
yeah. And there would no longer be any
Cover-
BCBA support at our
the
high school level.
Right, okay. And so the team leaders at the middle school and the curriculum leaders, I'm not really clear on that role. Oh, where did she go?
She asked for a very brief break.
Okay, we'll take a break. I think she has to answer this question.
I have a question that maybe Mr. Richatelli
Okay.
can answer. Going to the positions that Ms. Glennon was talking about, a lot of them are seem to be very support staff driven. Does that have any sort of contractual or go against any contractual obligations that we might have among the teachers? Or other collective bargaining units? Like, for instance, the one that popped into my head was the middle school greeters.
Yep.
If the secretary has to take over that role, does that fall within the contract?
It's something that we probably would have to bargain impact.
Okay.
The secretary
They used to do it. They used to do that
Yeah, they used
work.
to do it, correct. Yep. And it's part of their job. When the greeter is not there, the secretary would take over that role. But there's probably some impact that we would have to bargain.
Okay. But you don't see, with the other ones, the team leader stipend or the curriculum leader position, you wouldn't see any, you wouldn't think there'd be any contractual issues?
That's really a Dr. Kataia
Okay, all right,
question.
fair enough.
Or, I don't know, Mrs. Kagi. Wendy? Yeah.
Yeah, I think she
Yeah.
should probably answer
Okay,
that.
all right.
We'll just take a break then for a second.
Can I ask a custodian question?
Sure.
Perhaps if Mr. Richatelli, so could you just, I'm a little concerned with us coming off COVID, with this idea of going down to one custodian, a school that will bring us below industry standards, particularly because we truly don't know what's going to happen in the future. Can you just talk a little bit about what the scenario would look like with just one at each school?
No, it wouldn't be one at each school, it would be a reduction of one at each school. So there are currently.
Thank you for
Yeah.
clarifying, but still.
Yes, it would, they would have to do less rotations, so it would be less cleaning. Or overtime. which-
Is that worrisome?
It's not ideal. It's not ideal.
Dr. Kutaia, so the team leaders at the middle school and the curriculum leaders at the middle school, I'm not entirely clear what their role is. Is it similar to the coaches at the elementary school?
No, they're full-time teachers, thank you for asking that. They're full-time teachers, and these individuals provide additional supports outside their school hours.
Okay, it's a stipend only, right?
Stipend only, yep.
Okay. Mr. Dion?
I just, while you were out, I asked, but I'll ask you because they said you would answer it. Those two.
Thanks a lot.
You got pushed off on you. To the school team leaders and the curriculum leader position, is there any contractual issue that you see with eliminating those stipends?
Positions.
Position, sorry.
I don't know. I just don't think the work will be filled, so I'd have to check.
Okay, all right, thanks. Could you check for us?
I will.
Thanks.
Other questions on this page? Move on.
We talked about considering reducing one high school secretary at each school. We'll be shifting responsibilities across the other secretaries. Of course, in these scenarios, like custodian secretary, there'll be layoffs. There isn't like another position to put that. I mentioned this earlier, eliminating a central office teacher leader. This is a person that works across the district, is not assigned to a school, but is assigned to a particular content area. So for example, we have a secondary teacher leader in humanities, secondary teacher leader in STEM, and they provide curriculum and HQI support across the district in those respective areas. So now we get into, one more, reduce paraprofessionals across the district. I'm looking for 4 paras to reduce, excuse me. Now we get into the counselor section. There's a different array of options here. Reducing the high schools by 1 counselor each, reducing the middle school by 1 counselor each, and which would take us back to the 1.0 at the middle school. And then eliminating the 4 positions that we are proposing to move to the budget next year, and then not bring over the others. So that 24-25 line you see 0, it's a future impact potential, not one for 23-24. But I would not propose us having 4 elementary counselors and split amongst 8. They'll be like whiz in and out. Let me teach this comprehensive counseling program curriculum, and now I'm off to the next school. So
It would leave none at the elementary school if you eliminate 8.
if I do both of those,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
But I'm just saying, in case you have this idea, not a fan. Okay. Not a fan to go from 8 to 4. Reducing HQI learning experience over the summer. We're getting lots of traction there, so I'd hate to see us cut that back in nearly half there. Reducing curriculum work. You see listed there the curricular areas that Dr. Fedigan has identified that potentially would not launch. So you have some elementary health, humanities, family consumer sciences, social studies, and fine arts are impacted specifically by that reduction. We talked a little bit about summer school and just rolling back to what's required for credit recovery for the summer experience. That does not include special ed. We're legally obligated to provide extended school year for some of our kiddos. Then the option of freezes on school-based budgets, 10% and 20% there. That allows schools the flexibility to purchase supplies, materials, resources. In some cases, particularly at the older and at the high schools, it provides for some student activity funds as well. You see the elimination of freshman sports there, including football, boys and girls basketball, baseball, and softball at each high school. Clearly that impacts our pipeline for athletes. Engaged students are better students and gives them a sense of belonging, and sports is one way for a lot of kids to do that. So I'd hate to see us do that. There's a transportation related to freshman sports. We started the middle school athletic clinics. We'd be reducing that. And then I know the board hates to talk about this, but a reduction in building and grounds. The number is small, and it feels like it gets smaller every year. Mr. Bradbury does so much with so little, but we would propose. And part of our strategy here was to take a look at all levels and all different types of work. So we felt like building and grounds had to be on here.
Questions on this page? Mr. DeYoung?
Thank you. I know you mentioned the counselors a number of times tonight, but I just wanted to first of all, I think it would be an absolute travesty if we lost the counselors. Even one would be a travesty. Can you speak to the workload that the counselors at the elementary, middle, and high school are currently performing? Now, there's only one at each elementary school, which sounds like, oh, it's one for every elementary school, but there's big problems that are happening, right? So, or big situations that they need to resolve.
So the roles are somewhat similar and different at each level. And I really think we just need to do another presentation, Mr. Brown.
That was a question asked during the budget, exactly what they do, the differences between
Yeah.
middle, elementary, you asked the question, middle, elementary.
Yeah, no.
So I think you're asking something a little different
So
right now.
slightly different, just the workload, like if you could speak to like, are they maxed out? Do they have room to, add more to their plate? Like, yeah, I mean, I think I know the answer to it, but I think it would be beneficial to hear it from you.
So the elementary school counselor is not a fireman, as in going and putting out fires. They are pushed into all classrooms through a comprehensive school counseling curriculum that we've built based on national and state standards. So every school counselor is engaging every kid. So if you're the counselor at JFK, you see every kid. And you're pushing in and doing that as like part of your regular schedule. So you go ahead and take the, I think, 18 sections there, 16 to 18 sections there, and you spread it across a week, and that counselor is seeing kids every day. On top of that, there are, I was part of a process once where a teacher came to a counselor and said, my kiddos are having a hard time with the words they speak to one another. They're being less than kind. And this is kindergarten. That's probably a skill we want to teach in kindergarten, right? So that teacher went to the counselor and said, specific problem, can you create a lesson to push in? And so that's another way a counselor is engaged. Then there are small groups of kiddos that might need some intervention, and then some one-on-one. So the crisis-based perception I think that people have, I think that's the issue, that they don't believe we have that much crisis because we're Milford, and why we would need counselors in Milford is really off the mark. So I'm, the workload question, like I've never seen any counselor sitting in her office.
I think you answered it. I think you answered it very well. I mean, that
And
was my point.
There's a deliberate role for the counselor.
Right.
It's not a wait in my office and wait for the customers to come to me. That's not, like, listen, I went to school in the 80s. We had a counselor. We went to go see her.
Right.
And she had chutes and ladders for us to play so we could talk about our feelings. Not like that anymore. When I went to school, not like that. These counselors are part of the school fabric. Kids know them. They talk about executive functioning and how to treat one another. You know the developmental relationships framework I talked about, one of the key cornerstones? That is the school counseling curriculum. Expressing care, challenging growth, expanding possibilities.
So the other piece is, because I was looking at this question the other day. At all levels, our school counselors provide support for crisis needs, assist with DCF referrals, and coordinate with outside agencies to ensure responsive support to students and families. School counselors participate as an integral member of the student assistance team and assist in monitoring student attendance. So there's a whole menu of things that they do in addition to the push into the classrooms and the Tier 2 small group counseling and responding to students in crisis. That's just at the elementary school, and there was a whole nother explanation about middle and high school. But on top, and besides that early career exploration, I mean, even though it's not as defined, I'm sure, as in, well, obviously not as defined for a 5-year-old as it is for a high school aged child, but still important. Any other questions on page 1? Ms. McDonough Souza?
Thank you.
I'm sorry, page 3.
With regard to the school per pupil expenditures, can you just remind me and give me some examples of what some of the instructional and non-instructional supplies are? Because I think the word essential, instructional and non-instructional supplies is throwing me off because they're essential. I don't think they should be on the chopping block. So can you just remind me what those are?
Sure, I can give you specific examples.
Library books,
Yeah, library, let me get right to the,
math supplies, consumables for the science lab.
those are the instructionals. The non-instructionals would be things like copy paper, staples, things like that,
Crayons.
crayons.
I mean,
Supplies.
yeah, all these things sound like essential, as is said in here. So I'm just wondering how the schools would be able to do without all these things. But
Parents send them in.
Yeah.
You know, I know that I see this question all the time at the beginning of the year or over the summer on social media. What does my child need for school when they start school? And everybody says they don't need anything because Milford Public Schools supplies everything that they need, which I think we are kind of required to do, are we not? Isn't there part of the legislation that we're supposed to? But I think,
Yeah,
You know.
essential supplies.
Essential.
Yeah.
thank you.
Ms. Wolf-Boynton?
So perhaps I'm interpreting things wrong, but just as we look at, the cuts on page 3, and even, at the bottom of page 2, we're looking at paras, at support staff, at greeters, of coaches. Like, to me, these are the people that help those students who don't need the services of the academy, right? But aren't necessarily the kids that they feel like they fit in everywhere, right? That these are the people who makes someone feel like they belong or show them something about themselves that they might not have realized, right? Just through their daily interactions. I don't know, I feel like reading these potential cuts, we're also in a way taking away opportunities for success for those students who might not meet any kind of special ed qualifications, but aren't the stars and that are self-sufficient. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it seems like we're taking away something very valuable for students who need people around them and need to learn different skills in order to realize I can be good at academics.
Well, I don't know that specifically, Ms. Wolf-Boynton, I'm sure there are examples of that, but like every adult is part of our community in Milford Public Schools. So every custodian, every secretary, every para, every coach, every teacher. So we are a school community and we serve different roles. And one thing we've talked about a lot about in our SEL curriculum is, do children feel like they belong? And the second layer of that is, do adults feel like they belong? After conversations like this, I don't know, if you're on this list, do you feel like you belong here? This is the damage that is caused to a school culture when we're engaging in these conversations. You can't unwind this conversation right now about cutting custodians at the high school. Will they feel valued? If we can say, let's cut one, right? So I think it's a two-way street. Each person is part of the fabric of this system. And they serve a purpose, whether it's some kids who live on the outskirts on the fringe or not. But it's a dual purpose. As adults, we have a need to belong as well. We're part of something here in Milford. We've built something. And everybody on this list is part of that thing we've built. So I think it's a two-way street, what you're saying. And that's the damage that this kind of thing causes that is hard to unravel just by starting on July 1st and now we'd open another year, right? So what if you're a person on this list and you're still here in September? Do I wait for the next bad year? Right? That's culture kind of stuff.
I think it's important to say that, none of us want to be having this discussion. None of us want to have to be talking about any of this. But it's the reality that we're faced with. We have to do the responsible thing and start having the conversation. But I will say that, if, in looking at all these dollars, I haven't added it all up, but in looking at all these dollars, if the expense didn't have value to the school district and need, it wouldn't be in our budget. So any one of these things that we take out is going to have an impact. If it doesn't have an impact, it should not be in our budget. So, I wanted to ask, so the curriculum work, we've already stretched that out once, correct? We went from a, 5 or 6 year cycle to 7, correct?
It is 7 years, and COVID had required us to revisit that.
And there's one other thing I wanted to ask. I don't remember what else I wanted to ask. Anybody else have any questions? Yes, Ms. Irby?
Thank you. You just mentioned the special education students, briefly, and the reduction of the paraprofessionals. And that's a cut of 4 FTEs and a minimal dollar amount here. But overall, would those students with IEPs and 504s be protected in the class size change or in this reduction? Would they lose services? Or
We'd be required to fulfill the services as outlined in the IEP still.
even with the reduction of
We'd have to.
paraprofessionals, we still
It's
will
required.
have to find ways.
Right, Mr. Brown?
We would do some variations in how we allocate the staff. It'd be a difficult situation where we provide high-quality special education programming. Reduction in staff would still meet the legal requirements of the federal and state regulations, but the quality would be diminished.
Ms. Doyle?
Looking at the 6th grade and the discussion about, did I miss the page? I'm sorry. I might have been on the other page. Of going back to the 6th page,
On page 2?
on page 2, sorry. It was kind of mixed in my brain with all of these other things going on. The team model has been in place fairly long at the 6th grade level. So it would be a total change in culture within the district, right?
Yeah, I don't know how long team model's been in place, Karen, Wendy?
Harborside Middle School, I had team model, so that's 20 years ago.
But we want to be careful that we don't fall into the same pit when I was at school, right?
Right.
So there's always opportunity to revisit how we group children. I'd rather, do it in a planful, systemic way as opposed to a reaction to budget.
Okay.
So if in the future, if you're paying attention, we're making some changes in middle school. We change the schedule, want to change the course of electives. There may be some other things on that list, but we want to do it in a strategic, planful way, not in a knee-jerk reaction because we have to make a cut.
Right. Well, because I, in looking at all this and listening to it and the goals of the district, in terms of the 6th grade is ultimately we'd be adding FTEs if we are going in that pathways direction, ultimately in the future as students become more specialized and they go to that placement model and self-chosen model versus.
We could.
Be.
We'd have
in
to
the
look for
future.
efficiencies.
Right,
first.
in the future, and that would be the direction where this would be a regression in some ways to start treating the 6th graders as 5th graders again in middle school. In some ways, and how they're taught.
Could be seen that way. I'm more concerned about asking teachers to teach multiple subjects. Even though it's an elementary model, these are teachers, if you take a look at our 6th grade staff, they have some longevity with us, and
Right.
they're experts in their field, and they're skilled. Now we're on, you talk about 3 months planning for redistricting. Okay, flip the switch, you have a new curriculum to teach next year, so
Right.
that's jarring.
I think that you made a point there is, could that lead to some 6th grade teachers leaving earlier and trying to replace in that kind of system and kind of some staff changes, obviously can't predict the future.
That statement
again.
applies to all these cuts.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions on page 3? Yes, Ms. Alling?
First of all, I'd just like to say that I think that changing the way we structure sixth grade would be a huge step backwards. If we're having more targeted STEM learning in the elementary school, but then sharing math and science in sixth grade seems backwards to me. And then on page 3, I just had a quick question about the building and ground projects. It's not very specific, but I was just wondering if there's any projects in there that putting off could cause health or safety concerns.
We haven't determined exactly. I mean, we haven't gone down to that level as to if we had to cut this much money, which projects would go. But we always prioritize the ones that are life safety issues.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, I have a question for you, board members. We have, assuming there's no other questions on page 3, we have another page and a half to go, and then likely, there might be more discussion. It's 10 after 9. I did ask everybody to hold Wednesday as the date.
And you still have public comment too.
Yes, and we do still have public comment. Do you want to stop now? Do you want to go a little longer? Stop and definitely come back on Wednesday? Do you want to plow through it for another, half an hour and allow for public comment? What's the consensus?
I would like to suggest that we stop here and hear what public comment that we have and come back on Wednesday.
I would agree with
I
that.
think that would be
Agreed.
respectful for,
Okay,
public comment.
we will do that then. Dr. Kataya?
Yes,
Stop
ma'am.
now? All right. This is a lot to digest. Before we get to public comment, I do want to ask board members, if you do come up with any other questions that come to mind over what we've already discussed, if you can shoot me a quick note so that I can forward them to administration, so at least they have an idea of what we're talking about. It doesn't mean you can't ask questions on Wednesday. Mr. Dion.
Thank you. Just a procedural question. Do you think you could, just for everyone's sake, talk about what the process is for this board in particular? I know there's a process for the Board of Aldermen, but assuming the cuts go through, what is the process from there?
Well, typically, once the Board of Aldermen votes on our allocation, we would typically come back at our committee of the whole meeting in May to discuss any reductions that we had to make, and we'd have to formally vote on those reductions. I would say, due to the situation, we would most likely have to have a special meeting right away, rather than waiting to the committee of the whole meeting. So it would be in May, we would come back as a board and have more specific conversation about what direction we want to go in.
And would there be additional opportunity for public to express concerns at that point?
Well, we have public comment on our business meetings up until that point. We have public comment on our committee of the whole meetings that, depending on what the agenda item is, and we would certainly have public comment at that particular meeting, yeah.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions on procedure? Okay, then I'm going to just read the public comment statement. And speakers may offer objective comments about school operations and programs. The board encourages speakers not to express personal complaints or defamatory comments about the Milford Board of Education personnel or any person associated with Milford Public School System. Security issues and matters relating to negotiations and grievances will not be permitted. Consistent with the principles of the Federal Education Right to Privacy Act, discussion of students is prohibited absent parental waiver. Public comment does not allow for two-way conversation between speakers and the board. We welcome and appreciate your comments and opinions, and all will be taken into consideration. Please note our meetings are televised and live streamed on YouTube. We ask that you state your name and address for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes. And tonight, public comment is limited to agenda items only, which is the budget. So if there's anybody that would like to address the board this evening for public comment, you can speak from your seat, you can come up to the podium.
I will.
Okay, go right ahead.
Do you want to go? No, go Liz, I got you. My name is Liz Shipman. I live at 6 Dogwood Place. I'm a parent of 2 kids in Milford. My son Ryan is in 5th grade, going to middle school next year. My daughter is in 3rd. it's so hard to hear about cutting anything from our kids. What we need is $1.8 million more. We're not doing enough for our kids. I see the gaps in my children's learning. My son needs a math tutor. My daughter's writing is awful. She was in kindergarten when COVID started. This is the first year that school's been normal and not really interrupted by COVID on a daily basis. So the last thing I want to do is sit here and see all the progress that we've made just since my kids joined the school. We've reduced class sizes, we added language, we added STEM labs. It's been a beautiful experience. What we're not talking about is the huge learning gaps that these kids are experiencing. And I lose sleep at night thinking about that we might have done something wrong, that my kids will forever be affected by this experience. And I feel like my teachers, their teachers see the gaps, but they can't do anything with it because they don't have resources. And so I'm struggling to hear that anybody thinks we need to take anything away from our schools. And I would love to hear more about what our district can do to help kids get through the gaps. So I know you talked about the reading interventionist. What I saw as a parent is you took reading specialists out of our school. So where kids were pulled for small groups, those teachers were moved to classroom positions from reading specialist positions, and I'm probably not getting my words right. But what I saw as a parent 2 years ago, so in the middle of COVID, was a service taken away from our children. So I would, we would really be putting ourselves in a sad, poor situation if we had to make any cuts. But I also would love to see more investment in COVID, getting kids back on track. It was a lot about, my son was struggling with subtraction in second grade already. And now he's multiplying decimals and he's lost. And we haven't done anything in the school really to do a lot about that. So that's a big job, and that's a whole other budget that's not represented here. But I think that the Board of Finance and all of you wonderful board members, you need to really think about what more we can do with what we have. And the costs have gone up everywhere for everything that we're doing, and it's a really sad day for the kids of Milford and for me as a parent to look back someday and know that my kid lived through something extraordinary during COVID, but that we failed him and her, and we could have done more. So
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else? Yes.
My name is Emily Harrigan. I live at 107 Orno Road. I went to Milford Public Schools. I'm a proud graduate of Jonathan Law High School, and I won't say how long ago. We have a Jonathan Law graduate as well as a high school student. In reading through all the budget reductions and the potential budget reductions, it's ironic to me because it almost feels like we're doing a self-imposed pandemic. Everything that has been so glorious about this year for our kids, the performances, full schedule of sports, all of these different things. And so much of what the Board of Finance is asking you to do is to return to empty schools, to no extracurricular activities. So much of what gives our kids creative outlets and opportunity happens in the classroom, but also outside of the classroom. And this feels like a punishment by the Board of Finance instead of really understanding what our kids need in recovery from this very difficult last couple of years. Our kids need more support, not less support. And I thank all of you for your extraordinary service and having to even look at this. This does not do well by Milford's kids if we have to make any of these choices, if you have to make any of these choices. So for the Board of Aldermen that are here this evening, I thank you for taking the time and being diligent in understanding what this means to Milford kids and Milford families. And I really, really, really hope you really look at what this is going to do if you do not reinstate these funds. This is a lot of money, and it's a lot of impact. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else that would like to address the board? Yes?
Hi, my name is Mary Ellen Klosky, 326 West Main Street, Milford, Connecticut. As president of the Milford Education Association, which is our teachers union, I am very saddened to hear, the proposals that are being put on the table. I understand that the board is being faced, with this unfortunate circumstance. I've been in Milford a long time. I've always been a proud teacher in Milford. We have always been a progressive community. This will have a negative, any of these proposals will have a negative impact on our children and our school community. And so, you talked about the impact, it will have an impact. And, we have been looking at our children's faces throughout a pandemic. Now we're back to normal, which is wonderful, as normal as we could be, but it's still not normal yet. And, we still have more to go. But I also, just wanted to take this opportunity to say that I support the full superintendent's budget. I feel that the budget the Board of Ed put together was very comprehensive, and we need to make sure that the Board of Aldermen understand this and reverse the decision of the Board of Finance. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Mike Rizzo. I live at 12 Swan Harbor Road in Milford. I just wanted to say a couple of things too. One, I echo Dr. Pataya's comment on culture. I think having this discussion, I understand that it's necessary and you're doing your diligence, but it is at best a distraction and at worst destructive. So I think that needs to be said. I also just want to, I appreciate, first of all the work of this board. This is a very high level and informed discussion. It's quite impressive. And I appreciate the Board of Aldermen, folks who have come here tonight as part of their responsibilities. I want to just talk a bit about process. I think that, when, as the chairwoman said, when you put together your budget as a Board of Ed, it included what your priorities were, what was important to you, and you did your diligence doing that. That's your job as a Board of Education. You're focusing on the education. The Board of Finance, in the discussion that I witnessed, I went to that meeting. To me, their role is whether or not the town can afford this. It's not really to opine on the nature of the education, what it should look like, how many counselors we should have. I didn't hear that as part of that discussion. I think, and frankly, from the slideshow tonight, some of the statements that were made as part of that discussion were simply inaccurate. So I appreciate the clarification that was provided here. Looking at, what we're faced with tonight, these are really no good options. I understand we have to have the conversation. Nothing on any of these pages is productive or helpful. It does slow the progress. I do fear that it will lose talent within the school system. I do fear the impact that it have on our most vulnerable children, pre-K to post-12. So I really, I understand, and I also understand that there may be some serious questions to ask in the future. Maybe we do need to look at how to address the use of our school buildings. Those are good questions. Those are fair questions. Those are questions the Board of Ed should be answering. This is not the way to do it as a result of a budget cut. That's not thoughtful, it's not planful, and it's not good for the community, for the students, or the system as a whole. So I appreciate your work. I'm speaking largely to the steps to come, and that I hope that money is reinstated and we can continue the good progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to address the board before? Yes.
Hi, Carrie Rowland, 161 Beach Ave. I didn't plan to speak. When Dr. Kataya said this was an emotional night, it kind of hit me as we went through a lot of the cuts. I grew up in Milford. I went to Milford Public Schools, and I was at Point Beach School when that school got closed. I don't know what the reason for it was, but it's all brought me back to, now it's a pretty awful experience. And I think I came here tonight thinking the easy or the thing that we should be looking at is closing the school, and I can tell you right now, I'm sick to my stomach, and it has nothing to do with me right now. And I would urge the Board of Aldermen to reinstate these funds. I think what you're asking, or what's being asked of the Board of Ed and the administration at this time is near impossible and has a very long-term effect for our community, and it's not good. So thank you to the aldermen who are here. This goes way beyond politics now. This is about what's good for our city, for all of us, and for our kids especially. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to address the board? Yes.
Hi, Sarah Bromley, 27 Norway Street. I also did not plan to speak. I came to Milford because of good schools. I came from Kentucky originally, where I was supposed to learn Spanish by watching TV, where Barbies talk to each other. And I sat in the cafeteria with hundreds of other kids. We're supposed to learn Spanish this way. So I was so excited to be able to raise my kids in the school system. They are not here anymore, but I'm here because we can't afford to not fully fund the budget you have proposed. It's tight. I appreciate all the hard work you've done. And I'm also here as an early childhood educator of over 35 years to say, you are so right about the kindergartners that I'll be sending you this fall. I have never, ever in 35 years seen classrooms I'm seeing in the last 2 years especially. They are not ready socially, emotionally. They haven't had a chance to be with other children, and they are really struggling to, I cannot imagine how they're in kindergarten, those teachers are going to be able to teach them what they need, because they need so much. And cutting psychologists is the worst freaking thing to do right now.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to address the board? Yes.
Hi, I'm Colleen Tuba, 82 Fairview Street, Milford. I just want to say I support everything that Dr. Kataya says in her proposed budget. I can't imagine closing a school, and I can't imagine any of these cuts. There's not even one little thing where I say like, oh, $2,000 here or there would make any sense whatsoever. And besides like the education, like the math and the reading, all of that, my kids, yeah, they kind of like that. They need to know that stuff. But what they really look forward to is the science lab. They love science lab. The learning the language. My older one doesn't have that, but my younger one's had that ever since you started it. He loves that. Sports, when you said freshman sports, my kid, I don't think they would survive emotionally if they didn't have their basketball, their baseball, and if they went to high school and they didn't make varsity and they didn't have freshman sports. I just think it would, like social emotional, and we're all about social emotional learning in Milford. That's the big thing that we're doing now, and that taking away those things where I could see some people thinking, oh, the science lab, we don't need that. We don't need the sports. We don't need this language. That's the thing that makes the kid a whole, and that's the thing that makes at least my kids and a lot of their friends want to go to school, and then they get to learn those other things that they really need to know, but that's what motivates them to go to school. So I just wanted to say support everything that Dr. Kataya is doing with the budget and agree with him.
Thank you. Yeah. Anybody else would like to address the board? Yes.
Augie Harrigan, 107 Ornoke Road. Emmeline has said much of how I feel as well. And I'm sorry that we're all here talking about this as well tonight, and I appreciate everyone's effort to get the budget that we did get together, the proposed budget. Dr. Kataya, you've done an amazing job so far, and I want to see that continue. I went to a public school system that I often brag about. I'm not going to say it because Emmeline kicked me. It was here in Connecticut, and it was fantastic, and I always wished that my kids had a brag-worthy school experience like I have. And I wasn't even an exemplary student, actually. But, and by the time my kids got to high school here, I felt like we were really doing something. And those of you who know our affiliations otherwise know that we got ourselves involved in this community in education because we had some concerns as our kids were starting their journey. As they reached high school, I felt like we had really made some strides. And those strides came from investment. They came from correcting some of the sideshow antics that were going on with leadership at the beginning. Then we got to a great administration that set the course, but it was sort of still status quo. And then we got you, Dr. Kataya, who really started to give us the progressive sense of what we could be and the vision. And vision's what we've needed. So I feel like we're a little back to, or we're getting to that point, or we are at the point where I would brag about the Milford school system. And I'm really excited about what's going on in the arts. I have a student who is in high school, who is probably headed there in a year and a half. And in part because of the opportunities he's had in this school system. And I actually wish in some ways he'd be back starting where we are now and be even more inspired. He's got that supplementally, but I think some of the students who are going to the arts in Milford are starting to get more than he even had available to him, and I love that. I've heard people say that the Board of Aldermen in the room are doing their due diligence, and I think that is great. I love that there's some presence, some meaningful understanding, and some desire to do that, more so than perhaps another board that could put us here. But I want to also say the due diligence may be here tonight, and maybe here in the discussions that are going on. But the due diligence you really have is that with your constituents. What do your constituents want? They're not all fixed income aging people who are afraid of tax increases. In fact, I would argue the vast majority of them want to see investment in this community. And I hope that we get to the point where we understand that the majority of this community wants to see this school district thrive, and wants to see this community thrive, wants to see their property values go up. And if we want to talk about closing schools, I know some of us want to get there, let's do it in a proactive way that does not cause a tailspin for this school district. Let's look at how we want to invest in our community and stop saying doing more for less is a good thing in this community. We need investment, and we need to stop minuscule tax cuts that are symbols of trying to actually push the ball forward.
Anyone else would like to address the board? Yes.
Hi, my name is Jenna Burton. I actually live in Shelton at 321 River Road. I have very little affiliation with Milford or Milford Public Schools. I'm a student right now at Sacred Heart University. I'm studying social work, getting a master's. If I could say one thing to all of you, and like I said, I don't have an affiliation, but it still makes me sick to think of all of the things that are proposed to cut, because if there's anything that's been drilled into my head in the last year of my education, it's that the most important aspect, the most important protective factor for children is having at least one connection with an adult. And that protection grows with the number of connections that grow. And I'm from Maine. I was valedictorian of my class, and I still remember those specific connections in each grade. And they were coaches, paraprofessionals, random people within the school, even custodians. I know you don't have a lot of power here. You have to make cuts. You have to do what you have to do. But I would just like you to keep in mind that these connections are really, really important when you make these decisions.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to address the board? Okay, seeing none, thank you so much for coming out and listening and for sharing your concerns with us. Board members will be back here at 7 p.m. on Wednesday to finish the conversation. It's 9:32. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Mr. Pellicetti? Second. Second by Mr. Fowler, and we will adjourn at 9:32. Thank you.